So, Kyle, what are your thoughts on, I guess, Philly finding a way to fight through this win?
This was a huge win for Philly. And it's as simple as this, you guys. I'm going to keep it a buck here. When it comes to Philly, they should be counting their blessings that this series is at 2 games apiece. Because as far as I see it, when it comes to this series as a whole, Boston has been the better team. Even take this game four, for example. Philly, for 2.5 quarters, from the beginning of the first quarter, I'd say about halfway through the third quarter, Philly dominated. They were giving Boston trouble. Boston was having a difficult time scoring. James Harden and Joel Embiid, they were in a rhythm. It just seemed like Philly was going to run away with this game four pretty decisively. And then Boston, even though they were down 17 points at one point in this game, almost a 20-point deficit, they just slowly chipped away and ended up actually taking the lead late in the fourth quarter. And it was just something that I noticed from Philly. It felt as if the pressure was getting to them. And I think, not to say that they took their foot off the pedal, it's just Boston stepped up defensively. They were able to lock it down, and they were getting some good contributions across the board offensively. But the fact of the matter is, it took James Harden, who came up with a next level performance once again, to be able to save Philly from losing to Boston. Hits a huge 3-point shot in the corner in overtime to put them up one. Boston was up 2 points prior to that possession beginning. And James Harden got the kick out from Joel Embiid and hit it. And unfortunately, Boston was actually able to hit a shot as the overtime expired from Marcus Smart, but he shot it after the buzzer had sounded, and Philly ends up winning this game to tie that series at 2 games apiece. But when I look back at this game, this was a game that Boston probably should have won. And I'll look at it from this perspective. When you look at Jason Tatum, Jason had 2 points in the first half, which is very uncharacteristic of Jason because Jason's their primary scorer offensively. And to be fair, he stepped up in the second half. He dropped 22 points and he finished with 24 points and 18 rebounds, which is pretty impressive. You know, you get 24 and 20 and almost 20 from Jason Tatum. That's a pretty good stat line to carry. But had Jason just been a little bit more effective in the first half and only knocked down 1 or 2 more shots, Boston would have won this game. And, you know, potentially they would have gone back to Boston up 3-1 for game 5. And unfortunately, it's just Boston couldn't come up with some key defensive stops late in the fourth quarter and in overtime because James Harden hit that runner. I think it was maybe like a 7 to 8 foot floater, maybe at most 10. I couldn't get the actual feet part right, but it's somewhere in between 7 to 10 feet with the running floater to tie the game before going into overtime. But it just seemed like, even though that Philly looked like the better team overall today, the fact that Boston was literally at their heels when it mattered the most really gives, you got to give a lot of credit to Boston for just being able to weather the storm and just chip away, chip away, chip away. Now, I'll say this. The biggest takeaway was James Harden. James Harden, whenever he's assertive, whenever he is essentially what we saw from Houston James Harden, taking more aggressive shots, trying to get into more of a rhythm to attack the rim. This is what I think Philly has been looking for him throughout the series. They did not get that from him in games 2 and 3, where he looked rather passive, couldn't get into a rhythm, and Philly suffered because of that. And on top of that, Joel was extremely effective. I know that he's still limited. He's got that giant knee brace on because of that knee sprain that he suffered a few weeks back. But even he was effective. So going into game 5, even though I think that Boston has looked like the better team across the board in this series, the fact that Philly is sitting at a 2-2 series tie going into game 5 in Boston, count their blessings, honestly, because I'm going to be bold here. I think Boston should have wrapped this up in a sweep, because if you take away James Harden from going God mode in game 1, and you could say in similar fashion in game 4, Boston should have won those games. Even though that Boston didn't look like the better team in game 4, the fact that James Harden saved Philly is the reason why that this series is going back to Boston at a 2-2 tie. But realistically, I know that Joel was dealing with that knee issue, and that's 100% true. But Boston honestly should have swept this series by now. And you could take that as a slight against Philly. I'm looking at this objectively as possible. Philly is lucky to be here at a 2-2 series tie. And going into game 5, they got a situation that they can take advantage of. And Boston's got to find a way to just be able to finish these games late, because in games 1 and 4, it cost them. But back on their home court, we'll see how things go. But it was a good win for Philly. They definitely needed this, because James Harden essentially saved them when it mattered the most.
I mean, I'm not going to go as far and say that they're lucky. This is why you have superstars on your team. This is why you go and assemble a Joel Embiid and James Harden dynamic duo. This is why you go and assemble a Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. It's what we're going to get into in our next segment after this, which is kind of funny. You rely on your superstars in the postseason. You rely on the people you pay the most money to. You rely on your MVP, Joel Embiid, and then, of course, James Harden really took a backseat this season in terms of his scoring output as to what he used to do in Houston, because he realized it's Joel Embiid's team. He realized that he probably needs to be a little bit more of a facilitator with the younger core or younger cast around him. But there have been flashes, such as games 1 and games 4, where James has to take a page from his Houston days, where he just kind of shoulders the team and says, I got this. Clear as day, 45 in game 1, 42 in game 5 or game 4. He goes for 8 rebounds and 9 assists as well, with 4 steals. So yes, he went negative in the plus-minus scale, but he was finding ways to contribute on multiple sides of the ball. So when you talk about being able to rebound, being able to push the tempo, obviously putting the ball in the basket and scoring, getting your teammates involved, and then finding ways to be disruptive in the passing lanes and get some steals, that is exactly what teams need. Joel Embiid speaks for himself. It's probably the most dominant force in the NBA, going for 34 and 13 with 3 offensive rebounds, 34 and 13. Looked at the number on over. That is not a surprise. But when you look at the supporting cast, this is where I will agree with Kyle. Philly is lucky to an extent to be here because of supporting cast, like games like today, they didn't show up. PJ Tucker is not a scorer, so to me, his box score doesn't really matter as long as he's rebounding the ball, he's playing efficient defense, and he's finding ways to be disruptive. So, yes, he gave you 6 points. Take what you can get from PJ Tucker. Again, not a scorer, not known for being on an offensive scale to where he's going to tip it in your favor. Tobias Harris, somebody who has been consistent in these playoffs as of recent. He goes for 9 points. Tyrese Maxey has another struggling day from the field with 14 points. Then you talk about Nang with 9, Reed with 2, and then Melton goes for 0. Still finding a way to win, but it took your 2 best players to damn near combine for 80 points. That is the problem. That is the issue that I have with teams, because you want them to be more involved. You want them to contribute more. That's the word I should have used before. And when you have to rely on 33, 34-year-old James Harden to go out there and put 40 points a game, that is when I will slightly agree with Kyle. This is not a successful formula to win. This is not what's going to put you out there to win basketball games. I'm looking at this and I'm saying, I don't know if James can keep this up, because we saw it's been 3 games since game 1, and he's only been able to replicate game 1 success now. If my math serves me right, he's got to wait another 2 games. That means Philly would get eliminated if they have to wait 2 games for James Harden to show up again. So I'm looking for more people to get consistently involved in this offense on a regular basis. It shouldn't have to be James goes off 1 game, the supporting cast goes off the next game, and then James goes off again in another game or 2. If James doesn't go out there and give you 40, 45, he can give you 30, 35, maybe 12 to 15 assists if everybody's making their shots. If Maxey can actually find a way to knock things down consistently, Tobias Harris can come back to what he has been. Again, PJ Tucker isn't somebody that I'm really looking for to go out there, but Melton coming off the bench cannot have 0 points. That is somebody that they lean on to spark and come off to replace Maxey. So he's definitely got to find a way to contribute a little bit more. But overall, from a Philadelphia standpoint, definitely shouldered the load, and their 2 superstars took over. Now, from a Boston point, I'm low-key starting to think that this is more Jaylen Brown's team than anything else. Yes, there have been instances where Jason goes off for high 30-point games, but he disappears in crunch time. I mean, for Jason to only have 2 points going into half, He's not shooting efficiently from the three-point line. He was 1 of 6 this game. I believe there was a game where he was 2 or 3 of 10. It, Jason can't get into a rhythm. He makes up those points with his rebound, his defensive capabilities. I mean, Jason Tatum goes for 18 rebounds today and 4 blocks. So where he lacked offensively, he made up for on the defensive end. So again, from an offensive standpoint, he's struggling. And Jaylen Brown is really ascending into that like fourth quarter, go get a bucket. Like I gotta give it to Jaylen. But I feel like the offense really, really, really tries to force it to Jason because Jason is their guy. Jason got the supermax. He is their superstar. But Jaylen's up for a contract, and Jaylen is playing his ass off on both sides consistently. And he's shooting a lot more efficiently. 10 of 16 from the field. He had 5 assists, 3 boards, and he had a +5 on the plus minus score with 23 points. Didn't have to go and put up all the shots that Jason did, and he didn't really have to go and force anything either. So when you talk about who means more, you can make the argument that Jaylen Brown matters more to Boston right now in these playoffs. But the reason why I'm surprised Boston lost, they got contributions from everybody. 24, 10, 21, 12, 23, and 19 from Brogdon off the bench. He's a sixth man of the year for a reason. I'm just saying Boston has been in these games every step of the way. And if they want to go and move on to the Eastern Conference Finals, you got to put away a struggling and unfortunate injured Joel Embiid and older James Harden. So I look for Boston to bounce back in this next game. They'll be back on their home floor, and I would hope that Jason has a better game from the field and is a little bit more efficient.